Remember that time in the 80s when Gibson made the Les Paul thin? Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. The 70s and 80s Les Pauls, they are very well known for being heavy beasts. Your average is 10 pounds, some of the worst ones you find are 14. It was starting to become a problem, so much so, around 1983 you start to get the introduction of 9-hole weight relief within the bodies. In 1986, the Henry J era of Gibson starts, as Norland sold their ownership, but people were still saying Les Pauls were too heavy for them. So let's go ahead and see what they came up with here to help solve that problem. This is what is known as the Gibson Les Paul Custom Lite. At first glance, you might just go, hey, that looks kind of like a regular Les Paul Custom. What's going on here? How did they make it lighter? Well, for that, we need to look at the back, because you really wouldn't be able to tell much of the differences just looking at it straight on. It's all in how thin the body is now. They have streamlined this to basically make it about the width of an SG. But here's a good side-by-side comparison. Now this is a Heritage 80 standard. It's not exactly the same, but you can see just how much thinner the Custom Lite was in comparison to a full body thickness. I mean, you can feel this thing is pretty chunky, and this one, it's still got a good weight to it, but we've shaven off a lot. Now let's compare it to an SG. It's very similar. The only problem I have with that analogy is SGs are very carved on the edges, so you have to take it from the full body thickness, not necessarily the thinnest point of the edge. So think about the freaky fat and flat SGs that we talked about in this episode. But it is cool to see them all side by side here. But besides just making the guitars lighter, they also alleviated another issue that players have against Les Pauls. They think they have a pretty clunky heel design. Trust me, it's not the worst in the world, but if you're trying to get super high up here solely lead stuff, yes, this can start to get in your way. That's why we had the introduction of the Les Paul Axcess models, which is kind of a modernized take on the Les Paul Custom Lite because those things do have thinner bodies. So the thinner body got rid of some of the weight and made it easier to play higher up in the registers. Not only do they give it a thinner body, we also have a little bit of a belly carve. I wouldn't put it past you if you happen to have missed that spec on some of these because it does hide in a lot of photo angles. And you might notice, hey, is one of your knobs broken? No, this is a mini toggle switch. These came stock with pretty hot pickups, and you could coil split them to get single coil-esque tones. Now, a lot of these that you'll find on the vintage market today have all been reamed out for regular electronics. So if you ever see a vintage one that doesn't have the mini toggle, it originally had it, trust me. But now let's talk colors. The Custom Lite was made in an ebony finish. There's a charcoal metallic, which is a nice dark gray. There's the Heritage Cherry Sunburst that we're looking at today. Within the Showcase Edition series, there's also a limited edition gold top version that had EMG pickups stock from the factory and black hardware instead of gold. I've seen at least one done up in a rare Silverburst color, and then the absolute king of the Custom Lites is the metallic sunset finish. It's essentially pink. It's a very out there colorway. It works perfect for this guitar. That is the one I wanted to save this review and demo for. However, this one popped up on Reverb, and within about 10 minutes I had purchased it because it was advertised as really clean condition, and I loved, absolutely adored this Heritage Cherry Sunburst color. It just spoke to me. Now that I have it in person, I kind of wish I would have waited. It's a lot more beat up than it was advertised as, but I was thinking this would be like a personal collection one. I'm not so sure about that anymore, but I started the review. We might as well continue to learn about it because it is a pretty nice example. The original run ran from 1987 till about 1989. Can you find a 1990? Probably. Just like technically they were also made in 1986 because one of the prototypes that we saw in the EU demo shop had a serial number dating it to very early December of 1986. But there's one more version towards the end of their production that we need to talk about. It came stock with a factory Floyd Rose. They look kind of strange. They have a modified control layout. If there was a vintage Axcess Custom, this is pretty much it. And since there's a lot of love to Floyd Rose systems, those ones are actually pretty desirable. And there was kind of a brother model to the Custom Lites. There was one called the Studio Lite Pro. It's this big neon yellow thing. It was a slightly thinner Les Paul, but otherwise doesn't necessarily fit into our topic today. So overall, these things didn't really last that long. There is kind of a cult niche following behind these because they're just kind of interesting thinner bodied Les Pauls, and they're kind of hard to find on the used market. You used to see a lot more of these than you do do today. However, towards the end of the Henry J era, we actually saw reissues of this model. Now, I use the term reissue very loosely, because it wasn't a custom shop, it was Gibson USA. In 2013, they brought them back as a small limited edition. It was a pretty faithful recreation, except for we had a rosewood fretboard instead of ebony. The following year, they changed up our headstock, gave it a crown inlay, but we still had the 3 knobs and the toggle switch. And then they skipped a year because they went crazy in 2015. And 2016, we get the best modern version that no longer has the mini toggle switch. It's a 4-knob custom. You don't have to modify it if you prefer the traditional layout. And we got the return of the Gibson custom block logo on the headstock. So I've got some reviews out of those other ones, and I'll eventually review and document this really cool 2014 version that just happened to have a flame top. But if you want a custom Lite at a slightly cheaper price, I mean, remember, these things are a lot more expensive than when they were brand new, because I think they were like around $1,500-ish, and they were just absolute steals for what they were. Nowadays, they're in like the $2,500 to $3,000 range. But despite both being Gibson USA produced, the feel difference to the vintage originals is vastly different. This feels more like a custom shop level instrument, whereas this definitely feels like Gibson USA. So I'm not knocking the 2010s versions. They are very good guitars, but there is a significant feel difference. But here they are side by side, just for fun, because why not? I've got them here. So I'd say that's a pretty good crash course in understanding the custom Lite. But to learn more about this particular one, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs. Well, an hour later and this thing is beautiful, shined up like a charm. So let's talk about these pickups. We've actually already heard these before in the SG Elite review. A lot of times you'll see people mistakenly call these Tim Shaw PAFs. And these are not Tim Shaw PAFs. Not the ones that were introduced in 1980 and are highly coveted yet today anyway. These were still designed by him, but these are known as Spotlight humbuckers. What makes them different is the fact that they're a little bit hotter, and we have 4 conductor leads. That way we can do our coil splitting. So keep that in mind, these are called Spotlight humbuckers. That is not a term that gets thrown around too often, but that was the official name. Now that I've armed you with that knowledge, later made custom Lites have the Bill Lawrence design HBL, HBR series, because starting in late 1988, they start to transition the SG Elites into those. Some other regular customs start to get them. You can check out this episode if you want to learn all about those. So just because you tore yours apart and you're trying to verify it's original and it doesn't have this, the circuit board's also correct. The up position is full on humbucking mode, and it reads 9.13 k ohms within the circuit on the bridge. Neck position is 8.27, and the middle just for fun at 4.33. Now if we flip the switch down, we should get about half that. 4.76, neck 439, and middle 228. And something else you might notice is the routes look kind of strange on the top. That's why when I do the real versus fake videos, sometimes I have to have an asterisk that not all of them look perfectly squared off and whatnot. There are a few strange models that do have these more triangular-like shape routes. Nothing has been modified here. That is how they left the factory. However, it's possible somebody added this foam because the pickup was wiggling on them. But here's a cool look at our cross-section. So we still have the full width maple top, but since the mahogany body is thinner, you can see some of the wire channeling right here and how large it is. That's part of the weight relief. They make that channel wider than it has to be. And I'm not sure if these had 9-hole weight relief or not. We'd have to take an x-ray to it one day. It wouldn't surprise me if they did though. The late 80s, whatever plastics they were using for the pickup rings, it is very common for them to split right here. Now this one's been repaired, so we don't necessarily have to worry about it, but I would definitely be a little bit more gentle with that cover. But so far, this one looks like it's okay. But if you have a late 80s Gibson and you start to see it bow, it's eventually gonna crack. The bridge is the standard one of the era. They're Schaller made in Germany, as you can see by the marking right here, and it is a full weight tailpiece made by the same people. Now what's kind of cool here is, do you see the shadow that's going on right here? The finish underneath the bridge and tailpiece is a little bit darker, and you can kind of see the shadow going on with our pick guard. So perhaps this finish started a little bit darker, or it's the off-gassing of the finish has been trapped a little bit by that, and sometimes that can discolor it. So even if you wanted to take the pick guard off this guitar, you would still kind of have it. But speaking of the guard, here's what it looks like. And the back. As far as our controls go, it's just 2 volumes, 1 for each pickup, and then you've got your master tone down here. Then again, your coil split switch. And this switch tip has definitely been replaced. It's not the right style. But as far as the condition of this one, I couldn't see it in the seller's photos. It's one of those things where when you know it's there, you can just barely tell it's in their photo over here. Would have been nice had they had a nice close-up of that. Other than that, we just had some scratches in the picking area. That cleaned up okay. But then I was a bit disheartened to see this. There's some minor finish chipping along the binding right here. Now thankfully it's not brittle. I was able to polish over it just fine, but you can see through to the bare maple in that area. And we've got some dings along the top. Some scratches here, a couple more dings. But just as another fun trivia, you probably see this meme posted all the time. Les Paul and Paul with Paul's Les Paul. You know, Paul McCartney and Les Paul the man. It's one of these guys that they're holding in there, just in the ebony finish. So moving on from this two-piece maple top and mahogany body, we've got a mahogany neck with a true ebony fretboard. And here's the reason why I say these original 80s ones feel like the custom shops of today as compared to the 2010s Gibson USA versions, is these have true mother-of-pearl inlays. And at the time of production for these, the regular Les Paul Custom was made at Gibson USA. It wasn't a full-on custom shop product yet, but the formal custom shop as we think of it today wasn't even introduced until '93. But that same thing is true on the headstock. We've got the mother-of-pearl inlays up here. But just besides the cosmetic feel, it's just these feel exactly like the late 80s customs because they were built on the same line. They were finished the exact same way. The feel is night and day in my opinion. But being awake at both times is good. They both have their own pros and cons. As far as fret condition on this one, you've got a little bit of wear, but nothing too extreme. I just polished these frets and cleaned up our fretboard and got it conditioned. Specs on our ebony fretboard, I get a 12-inch fretboard radius. We've got a 24 3/4 inch scale length with a nut width measuring 1.7 inches. That increases to 2.05 by the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.85 and 0.97 by the 12th. There's that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. Almost has more of a U-shapeness to it, where it has a bit of a bump to the back of the neck the further up you go, but it's just more of a traditional C right here. In fact, you can actually just see that by looking at the neck. Pretty standard C shape, but up here towards the heel, you see how it starts to get a little bit more right there? It's just an effort to chunk it up just a tad. Something else I want to mention is the fretboard has shrunk a little bit, so there is a bit of a ledge where the neck stands very slightly proud due to that phenomenon. It's pretty common, but always good to know about when you're considering a purchase. Moving on to the headstock, we can see our beautiful truss rod in great shape, mahogany neck, with our regular Les Paul Custom truss rod cover, and our great giant 80s headstock. It just has that really nice characteristic to it. Vintage without being true vintage. I guess the only other thing I really wish the seller would have pointed out to me is the top E string tuner is significantly bent. You see how it should be straight? It's very crooked, and you don't normally see that on Grovers. That must have been quite the impact. The back is quite nice on this thing. That's the one good thing about having a see-through color is we can actually see all the nice mahogany wood grain that we've got back here. It looks like it's a one-piece back, but that's not necessarily rare in this era. I especially like the wood grain right here in the swoop because the way that they carved it out makes it go a different direction. But as far as condition, we definitely have a couple of dings / impressions up here by the heel joint area. And then some sort of a strap really impressed the finish right there, pretty much cut straight through it. But let's check out this wiring. It is incredibly hard to find good photos of a custom Lite in its original wiring scheme. So here you go. Here's what this pot looks like. Here's what we've got over here, as well as our tone pot. You can see how they're doing our capacitor. And then this is our mini toggle, so you can see how that's all wired up. I did find this funny though. Your output jack plate's a little bit smaller than normal because of the thinner body, and it must be a little bit closer because usually there's a complete shelf right here, but that got slightly chopped away in this area when they were installing that, I guess. But it's about 1.4 inches thick. Just kind of depends where you take it with the maple top carve. A normal Les Paul is about 2 inches. And then I was surprised to see a regular toggle switch. It just barely fits in that route. As far as the edges, we've got the thick binding in the cutaway. Looks a little bit extra big on this guitar. We've got some nicks and dings. This was definitely played. It's a miracle we still have the original strap buttons on this thing though. Now we can move up the backside of the neck. You've got some impressions in the soloing area, but it's really the cowboy cord area that's got some slightly deeper scratches / dings. You can very slightly feel those. Neck was all hazed over when I had first gotten it too, so after a nice polish job, that's feeling like brand new again. As far as the volute area, should we have had one, there's definitely some scratches and stuff going on there. Here's a look at our Grover tuners. It's kind of funny how the Grover branding is really off center on that one. Then our serial number right here dates it to 1988, 70th day of the year. Nashville production, number 58 for that particular day, made in USA. Being a vintage guitar, we definitely need to do a blacklight test. Looks like maybe a little bit of clear coat rubbing in this area. That seems to make sense. You can see our nicks and dings and scratches a little bit more clearly. I always love the way Heritage Cherry Sunburst looks, especially under blacklight. Everything's looking good on the top. Binding glows the way you normally see. And our headstock is looking to be in good shape. The back's also looking nice. Looks like a little bit of clear coat wear around here, but nothing too crazy. Always good to check for heel breaks and things like that. We seem to be okay on this model, but this helps you see some of the nicks and dings along the treble side. There's a lot of damage down here, but the side you see while you're playing seems to be pretty good. As far as the neck, I'm definitely not surprised to see that we've got some clear coat wear back here, because this thing was definitely a player. So that's just the clear coat. You don't see that in regular lighting situations, and since I've polished it up, you honestly can't even tell. That's why you blacklight a guitar, so you can describe it as honestly as possible. You also have a little bit of rub right here and there, but that's not a headstock break. Looks like we got a little bit of hanger rash over here. So all in all, a pretty respectable one. All said and done, these things aren't that light, 8 pounds, 4.4 ounces. You can find modern day historic reissues that are full body width that weigh about the same. But you gotta remember, in this era, the average was about 10 pounds. So getting the almost 2 pounds off was a little bit of an improvement. But let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how these spotlight pickups sound. Like the tones out of just the regular humbuckers. They have a nice bright sound to it. If you listen to that neck pickup, a lot of times Gibson pickups can get a bit muddy in the neck. It's still full, but not over in your face. So that pairs really well with the bridge pickup in your middle. But now we're gonna find out the reason why I think most of these end up getting routed out and ditching the mini split. Because listen to this. Full on bridge. Sounds just a bit too thin. Like, you gotta remember, this is very early days of coil splitting technology. First time Gibson used it on a Les Paul was in 1978 for the 25-50th anniversary, so it's evolved for almost 10 years at this point, but I still don't think they quite got it. Well, let's see if rolling our tone down helps. I'd say that's a little bit better. But I will say, this is very comfortable. I'm demoing this one right after a full-size Les Paul. That's more of a reissue. And yeah, I could see why somebody would like playing this on stage. You get the vintage looks and it's all Les Paul Custom, except for nobody will know your secret that it's thinner than normal. But let's try some dirt. Now that we know about the original run Les Paul Custom Lite, what are my final thoughts on this? The coil split, it wasn't my favorite, but it definitely gives you a little bit of different options. But remember, some of the later made ones will have different pickups than you'll find in this one. So if you see one that has large screws in your pickup ring surrounds, that means you likely have the Bill Lawrence HBL HBR set. But it's basically what I was saying earlier. These feel just like a regular Les Paul Custom of this era. So if you've played a late 80s custom, you already kind of know what to expect. So just to re-emphasize that point, this feels just like a late 80s Les Paul Custom, whereas a Les Paul Custom Lite from the 2010s era will feel nothing like a Les Paul Custom out of the custom shop from the same time period. But now that the 2010s custom lights are getting really expensive on the used market, you're starting to see these old ones also go up in value. So kind of interesting how those play, because I remember when those were like 15 to 2,000 and then these were around 3,000, and yeah, the market has went up significantly since I first got into these about 6 or 7 years ago. So is it my favorite guitar in the world? No, but it was very comfortable. I like this neck profile. It's slim without being overly slim, and it just hugs your body just right. And you gotta love this Heritage Cherry Sunburst color. You got a nice plain top on this one, so I don't regret documenting it. I just wish it was in a little bit better of condition so I could have kept it for my personal collection. But if you're interested in being the next owner of this one, you can find it on my website, troglysguitarshow.com. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.